Nice to have you, Anthea.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
It's awesome. For the record, let's talk your name and your company and maybe a little bit about it.
Sure. So I'm Anthea Sargeaunt. My company is 2S Water. We have developed a sensor that detects metals in water in real time. I know that sounds like a really niche thing to do. It's actually a huge problem in industry and in the environment, because when these toxic metals get into the environment, they can be incredibly damaging to ecosystems and populations. So that was the problem we really wanted to solve.
Love that. Who ends up buying it?
So right now we're selling it to industrial water treatment facilities, primarily in the mining sector. We wanted to go where the biggest problems are happening around water contamination and start solving the problem there.
Great. Okay, so give me some history. Okay, let's talk about this from an entrepreneurial perspective.
Sure.
Were you always an entrepreneur? Was this an idea for you? Is this your idea? Tell me a little bit about how it kind of all came together.
So I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, but never in this kind of grand venture before. And I come from a long line of entrepreneurs.
Okay.
So my first business, my now husband and I did while I was in university. That was how we paid our rent, and it was
Nice.
Lots of fun. And then I went to go work for the family business, which was founded by my grandfather. When that business was suffering under the oil and gas crashes of the last decade or so, my father and I decided that we were going to start a new business. We each kind of had an objective of what we wanted in that business. I wanted to have a positive environmental impact. I was tired of living in the oil and gas industry and supporting my family in a way that I felt good about, but not supporting the environment in a way I felt good about. And my father wanted monthly recurring revenue, because you need two types to start a business.
Good idea. Yeah. It's a nice thing to have an idea, another thing to make sure you're creating revenue from it.
Absolutely.
So was like entrepreneurship a dream for you? Was it something that you stumbled upon? I mean, how did you look at this as the options between job and business, or how did that tell me about your mindset around all that?
A little bit, I think. I've always wanted to have control over my own life and to do things, and my degree is in business, so I wanted to apply those skills and be able to actually use them in an applicable way, and it felt like in the job market that wasn't going to happen. So the only way to really take control of my own future was to start a business. On the other hand, with the long history of entrepreneurial endeavors, it also seemed like the most logical thing to do.
It's nice to have family that had kind of done that before.
Yeah, and nice to have their support as well. I don't think I could have done it without, my father by my side helping me the whole way through. So.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So when you structured the company, how did that look in the beginning?
So originally when we founded the company, Tony was the CEO. My father's Tony. We made it that way because we felt that having a woman CEO was only going to disadvantage us. So it started out with him officially leading the company, but because it was my baby, I was out there doing everything. I was the one at all the events. I was the one pitching. I was the one on the phone doing all the sales, and it did not work great. People could not understand what was happening. They where's the CEO? Why are you here? Why isn't he here? And why are you doing all of this and he's not? And finally, one of the local entrepreneurs in the ecosystem sat me down and really pointedly asked me, like, what is going on here? And I explained. I said, I didn't want to be the reason the company didn't thrive. And she was a woman, and she said, that's just not a really good way to approach this. I do not recommend. And so the next day I went into my father's office. I geared myself up. I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I walked into my father's office and I said, I should be the CEO. And he said, okay, I was waiting for you to ask. And that was it. We switched it over. So, and it's worked so much better since then, because that confusion is gone, and we've been able to move him into roles that he's happier with instead of kind of shoehorning him into that role. And I've been able to really step in and do the things that I wanted to do in the CEO role. So,
is that role, I mean, you took it on fairly naturally. I mean, you did the work, you went around and you did the phone calls, you did the sales calls and all that kind of stuff. Is that something you find you're comfortable with, or have always been comfortable with, or how does that look?
I've kind of come to the theory that if I'm comfortable, I'm not really doing the right thing.
Okay.
I'm probably not pushing myself hard enough. I'm not pushing the company hard enough. When I feel like, when I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I have something to do and I don't want to do it, That's when I know I'm doing the right thing. Like when I don't want to pick up that phone and do that cold call, when I don't want to sit down and negotiate with that investor, that means I'm pushing myself and I'm challenging and I'm growing. So that's exactly where I want to be.
I love it. Can we go into detail on that? Tell me what that feels like, what kind of is going through your mind, what, kind of, because I think a lot of people struggle with this. This is, I believe that our comfort zone is kind of a limiting factor to a degree. And when we stretch the comfort zone, that's where all the good things are, right? But in the moments that that's happening, like that, knowing that you have to pick up the phone, tell me maybe a little bit about what your mindset feels like and what it looks like to you.
Well, I think nobody enjoys that moment. Nobody enjoys the moment when you have to do the thing that you have geared yourself up to not want to do. But the moment after, that's what I live for. That moment when I go, I didn't want to do it, I did it, and look how it turned out. So many times it's worked out fantastically. It's been the opportunity I needed. I cold call someone and they're excited and they want to buy the product. I sit down and I negotiate with the investor and we reach a deal. And if I hadn't done that, where would we be? I'd still be sitting at home dreading picking up the phone. I hate that dread. That's why I just do it. And then I can be over that, and then I can feel that lovely feeling of I did what needed to be done, and it's great.
Awesome. Is there any prep that you do? Maybe not in your own head, but even each day or anything around how you kind of own this and actually really take it on? Is it just the successes that come afterwards that drive you, or is it kind of, what do you do to kind of prep yourself to be prepared for these things each day?
Yeah, I think I work a lot on mindset and making sure that I have the right mindset. Mm-hmm. Like being an entrepreneur is difficult. It's what I chose, and I love difficult things, so that aligns very well. But I have to guard my own mindset because it's very easy to get discouraged. And so I always try and make sure that I'm taking in the right kinds of media, that I'm taking in the right kinds of friends and social activities, so that everything is supportive and builds upon that. Because in the end, it's me who has to do this. I have to build this business. I have to pick up the phone and make that uncomfortable phone call. So I have to be strong in my own base to do that. And it's important to guard that, I think.
Where do you go? What kind of media, what kind of things do you like? What are the inspirations for you?
I watch a lot of YouTube interviews with other entrepreneurs, hearing about how they did their story. I seek out a lot of friends in the startup community as well, because they're going through similar experiences, and no one is as excited about what you're doing as someone else who's doing something similar. So. Okay,
so tell me a little bit more about that community.
Oh, well, we're so lucky here in Edmonton. We have such a fantastic community, between Startup TNT in the rainforest and just so many things going on. VMS, for example, not only does it provide a really great network of other entrepreneurs, but it also provides that kind of mentorship, because people are at different places along the journey. And all it takes for someone to help you and guide you is for them to be one step ahead of you. They don't have to be all the way down the journey. They just have to have gone through what you've gone through once, and then they can add some insight into what you're doing.
Entrepreneurship is often seen as kind of a bit of a lonely at the top type thing. How, maybe as part of a percentage, would you say that that's been taken away by the community for you, or like completely, or at least in part? How would you measure that?
I think to a large degree that's been taken away by the community, because I actually have that support network, and a lot of my really close friends are people that I've met through that community who run other businesses, who now come over to my house and eat dinner with me and play with my children. And it definitely is still a factor. A lot of people who live in more traditional jobs struggle to understand what I go through on a day-to-day basis. So it's so important to have that community of people who are around and understanding and living the same experience.
Okay. And you're a growth company, right? You are trying to scale. And you've got, how many years have you taken to get to your first customer?
It took us 4 years. 4 years of research and development, and most of that time it wasn't just research and development. I was on the phone talking to customers, trying to get someone to agree to let us install that first sensor. Yeah. And we're there now, which is so exciting.
It's very exciting, very exciting. Tell me a little bit about that journey. I mean, sometimes, you can come up with a solution that, create a cafe or start making bagels or whatever you might want to do, and that's fairly instantaneous. But choosing this space and then ultimately, did you know that it was going to take 4 years? And then as you went through that process, what were kind of the elements and the things going through your mind? How did you fund it? Probably a lot more questions than you needed in that one.
Yeah, that's a ton. I'm going to forget a ton of them for sure. So when we started with this idea, it was actually quite different than what we landed on now. When we originally wanted to monitor everything in the federal water guidelines, it was really one of those cases of shoot for the moon or shoot for the stars and land on the moon. We ended up realizing that metals were the biggest problem. You know, everything else, there was some kind of solution that we could incorporate into one big problem, but there wasn't a solution for metals. So we went out to tackle that first. And as we did it, we continued to talk to everybody that we could in the market. And we didn't find that product market fit right away. We thought we had. We did a lot of work in the municipal sector. We drove out to a lot of municipalities, interviewed everybody who would talk to us, and they were really interested. But I didn't know enough to ask all the right questions. And one of the things we didn't properly explore is how easy is it for a municipality to buy something, and what does that actually look like? What we explored was, do you need it? Would you use it? Like, would the data be valuable to you? All that stuff held up. But then when it actually came time to make those sales, the sales cycle in the municipal sector is so long that it just didn't align with what a startup needed to do.
Probably a lot of decision makers as well.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of really long sales cycles. You know, they're like, oh, we like it. It's January, so come back to me in December and I'll see if I can get it into next year's budget. Like, just didn't make any sense for us. Right. But the other thing is that we've been keeping our eyes out, we've been keeping our ears to the ground, trying to talk to anybody who had these kinds of issues. And we were getting a lot of approach from the mining sector. And that was where we really found out, you know, like, who cares more about metals and water than a metal producing mine? And that when we did find that product market fit, it was so instantaneous and it was so obvious that I hadn't had it before. Like, I thought I'd had it before, but then when we found it, suddenly we were getting into these phone calls. And in the first phone call, they'd be saying, you know, is there a chance that we could pilot this? And that never happened in the municipal sector. Right. And so that was, you know, we just dug in deeper and deeper and deeper into that market. And, you know, that was right when COVID hit that we were kind of doing that switch. And it actually aligned really well for us because suddenly all the meetings that had been in person were going online. So I went to the Mining Association meetings all across Canada, and I wouldn't pay any attention to the meeting. I'd just go through everybody in the meeting and send them a LinkedIn invite and be like, hey, we're in the same meeting together. And then I'd try and get them on the phone. And then we could talk about what their actual applications are. And doing that, I kind of narrowed it down. I realized we didn't fit certain kinds of mines and which kind of mines we did fit and what stage that mine needed to be in. So it was just a long process. But what was so revitalizing about it was that everybody was so excited to talk to me. Even if it wasn't their application, even if it wasn't a good fit for them, they were happy to get on the phone. They wanted to tell me about what they were doing. They wanted to hear about what I was doing, and they wanted to help. So I think we underestimate how willing people are to step up and do something for a complete and utter stranger. So
it's really interesting. I'm hearing this as the evolution, because you know, you go in with an idea, and then 4 years later you're in a bit of a different area, but it's still the same area, but you're just a lot more honed in. And so the discovery of that, I mean, was it disheartening? Was it encouraging? How did it feel going through a lot of that?
I think it was encouraging because I didn't realize when we were going wrong until I figured out when we were going right. So in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, municipalities were a bad idea. But at the time I was like, oh no, we've got this. So it was just that continual learning process as we go along. And we're still doing it now. I mean, the farther and farther we dig in, I start realizing there's 20 more questions I hadn't thought of that I need to ask somebody to find out if it's the right application. That process doesn't seem to ever end, I don't think.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think, I forget who it was, I want to say Winston Churchill, but I don't think so, but going from failure to failure without losing, you know, optimism.
And, you know, I think it's never a failure until you shut your doors and close your business.
I agree.
And even then, is that a failure? Because you've learned and you've advanced. It's not a failure if you open the doors on another business.
It's so true. I often, you've probably heard me say before, but I love the idea of the difference between a driver and the vehicle, right? The driver is the entrepreneur and the vehicle is the vehicle. I mean, it may not be the right vehicle. It may need to be tuned up differently. It may drive into a wall and crash, but it doesn't necessarily reflect completely badly on the driver. The driver has to figure out how to drive it better or drive a different vehicle or things like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so as you're evolving your business to what it is. I mean, now you've got some customers. It's starting to come together. I mean, this is a very exciting time for you.
I agree.
Yeah. So what's next? I mean, now that you're starting to get a little bit of that traction finally, what's on the horizon for you?
Oh, this is exciting now, because up until now we've been doing research, we've been trying to develop this product. Now I have to, like you say, it's that vehicle. Before we had the engine. We built the engine, and the engine now works. We've demonstrated the engine works, but I need to build the wheels and the seats and the trunk and get everything aligned so that it all runs together. And that's where I'm going to have the most fun. Up till now, my research team's been having all the fun.
Right.
Now I get to, we have to set up the support and install. We have to set up the sales pipeline. We got to get this machine running around the machine that we've built in order to service and sell it. And then do it in a way that can be scaled in a proper fashion. So that's our work for the next year or so. And
you're excited about that?
As you can tell, I'm exceedingly excited about that, yeah.
Well, that's good, because there's still so much work to be done, but it's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing growth engine.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, where I'm going to get to spread my wings and make a business that reflects what I want to see in the world in businesses. So
going back to that 4-year gap, if we want to talk about it that way, how did you survive? How did you pay for yourself? How do you make sure that, it's not just like, are you working on the side, or what kind of things are you doing to maintain cash flow in the business or whatever?
So for the first couple years, I was, both my co-founder and I were working on the side as well. We had one full-time employee, but we were working on the side of our desks. I think people underestimate taking that time to balance it out a little bit. There's nothing wrong with working off the side of your desk until you get your feet under you.
That, yeah.
And then as we started to get into it more full time, we were lucky to have the support of friends and family in a really substantial way that helped a lot.
That's awesome.
And that's part of why I'm exceedingly grateful to my father. His network of friends happened to be more liquid than my network of friends. Sure. And they were of great support to us. And we're also highly advantaged here in Canada in terms of grant funding. So I spent a lot of that time learning how to write grants, learning how to work how to work within the system, yes. In order to get grant funding when it made sense. And that's been a huge, huge supporting factor for us here. So
very good. And do you have investment as well?
We are actually kind of launching our first external investment round now. We're still we're in the late stages of negotiation, so I'm expecting to kind of close that hopefully in the next month or two here.
Exciting.
Yeah, very exciting.
So in this, I mean, you talked a little bit about that evolution. Have you had any, what you might call, looking back on your career as an entrepreneur, any massive missteps? Anything that's really kind of thrown a loop for you, and how you had to kind of last minute shuffle around and try to make it work?
I'm sure there have been tons, absolutely tons. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough.
True.
But I think, in terms of like a recent one that we went through, this funding round has been a huge number of missteps.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, tell me.
I've learned from all of them. I've learned so much from all of them.
Tell me what you were allowed to tell me.
Yeah. So we originally started this fundraise probably in September. And when I say we started, that's when we started getting offers. We kind of crossed this line where we became investable as we brought in our first real revenue. Mm-hmm. And it really changed the landscape. Before, I'd done a lot of research on it. We'd pitched a lot and everybody was like, oh, that's very nice, get back to us later. Suddenly people were like, so how do I invest? Which was a really big change in how things happened. Mm-hmm. So we went out and we got an offer from some angels. And then I took that offer to some VCs because I'd always kept those relationships really strong, thinking of our Series A. The way that the market was working in late September of 2021 was that there was a lot of money moving around. And I mean, there still is right now. So 2 US VCs looked at our angel deal and said, I don't think it's a good idea for you to do this. I think you should take a deal from us. I got excited. Who wouldn't?
Sure.
That's awesome. They're going to come in. They're going to bring a lot of money, a lot of support. Yeah. Both those VCs had good water market experience. They were both very nice. Like, one group had been putting a lot of time into us, a lot of effort, like really had indicated that they might be good partners going forward. Mm-hmm. And when the term sheets arrived, it wasn't a good stage fit. It didn't make any sense. Just the amount of reporting that we would have to do, the amount that we were giving up for the amount of money that we were bringing in, and their expectations for how quickly we could move into market weren't aligned with where our business was. So immediately we were giving up a lot, and we were setting up a situation where we were not going to, like, the situation wasn't going to be a beneficial relationship for everybody from the get-go. And that just made me so unhappy.
Sure.
Now I was in a pickle, because you know the stats as well as I. A female-led business gets 3% of offers that come to, that are out there. So I now had 2 offers on the table, and I was seriously thinking about walking away from both of them. And let's add into this, we have no money at this point.
Right.
Like,
of course.
None. I mean, when do we ever have money, right? It's a startup at this stage. But it was a huge risk to us to say no to these deals. And I brought in my management team. We discussed all the pros and the cons, and we made the decision to walk away from those deals. We did it in as kind and respectful way as possible. I don't think, like, I have very high impressions of both those VCs. I'm hoping that we can work with them on our Series A, but we were not ready for those term sheets. So we walked away with nothing in our hands, and we went back to the angels and said, I think we were wrong when we said no to your deal, and when we went to go talk to those VCs. Do you still want to talk? And thank heavens they said, yeah, of course. Yeah, we thought you were a little silly going for those VCs. We thought you might be back. And they didn't try and punish us for it or change the terms of the deal. They just reopened negotiations where they were.
Great.
And we're so eternally grateful for that. And I've learned so incredibly much. I have studied the theory of business deals. You can't get this far along without being run through like 27 different courses on business deals.
Sure.
I'd heard all the terms. I'd seen all the terms in theory. It's so different when you're holding it in your hand and it's talking about your company.
Right.
It was just visceral in a way that I had not expected it to be.
Right.
And it's really made me appreciate both understanding where we fit in that ecosystem and how the partners that we have now really want to play fair and understand our stage and understand what we're going through and want to make a partnership that's going to benefit everyone.
So you've got business experience, you've taken your, you've gone through your schooling and all that kind of stuff, and did that equip you to be able to look at these deals and understand what you needed to do, even with your discussions of your management team and everything? Or where did you turn if you needed outside help? What did you do to kind of be able to understand this whole landscape and make a good decision? And
I think that goes a lot back to the community in Edmonton. There was just so many people that I could pick up the phone and call, yourself included, to get some advice that wasn't biased. I think the problem is that a lot of the times when you have investors trying to give you advice, even if they're not, and that's exactly what I ran into. I went to VCs to ask for advice about a deal, not realizing how biased they were on this conversation. And that's when we took a step back and we reached out to mentors who were unbiased and really got their help and support. And I think one of the really big factors that's made our company thrive is we're part of the Foresight program out of BC. Yep. It's been the only program that's assigned us a mentor that's been incredibly long-term. So I have the same mentor who I meet with every week, and I have for almost 2 years now. And I think that as an ecosystem, maybe we underestimate the value of that long-term mentorship relationship, because it really gives you a depth of understanding and a depth of relationship that is so incredibly beneficial when you need to make these kinds of high import decisions.
Sure.
And they happen quickly.
Yeah.
Like that's been the other stressful part is like, when you get a deal on the table, they want to hear back from you 10 minutes later. Like you don't have time to be like, I wonder who I could possibly reach out to. I got to reach out to my network and see if I connect to somebody. You got to have people in your corner already.
Right.
And there's so many ways to get those people that I think, and so many great people in our ecosystem.
That's awesome. Now, if you were to look at this, go back to the beginning again, or even earlier, you, Anthea, 10 years old or 20 years old, what would you say to that person? How would you guide them, or what kind of words of wisdom would you share?
So it's cute that you think 20-year-old Anthea listened to anybody. I think something that I am still struggling with today, and I wish that I could have started the journey a little earlier on, is just understanding how much I am like a competent professional who can do this job. I'm not, you get so caught up in your gender or your role in life, or, for me, it's been a lot working with my father. I've always been, in that kind of structured relationship already. Everybody in the office was decades older than me. It's taken me a long time, and it's still a journey that I'm taking to understand that I'm competent. I can do this. I'm good at this. If there was a way to understand that faster, I would tell them. Now, obviously, I don't have great advice for my past self because I haven't knocked it down yet, but
Sure.
we'll get there.
I love that. I mean, so it's a stretch position, and you recognize it, but it doesn't take away from your day-to-day.
Well, I love my day-to-day. I mean, I think that makes it so easy.
Yeah.
I just, I'm the type of person who wants to be in a stretch position, though. I'm not really happy unless I'm pushing myself
Right.
to my edges, so.
And it's fascinating and encouraging to me, right? Being young, like you said, I mean, everybody in the office is decades older than you. That's an incredible thing, and I think it's fantastic. I mean, I'm a massive proponent of diversity, age, gender, culture, background, experience, everything. And I think because that adds the depth to the office, the depth to the team that is needed. But too often we can kind of get wrapped up in our own self, our own ego, our own view of how we look at it, and either be timid and fearful or overly confident and egotistical, right? But having those balances where all those pieces fit together and work together well, that's when magic happens.
Yeah, I think, so much of life is just reaching that right balance point. Too much of anything or too little of it is not good. And, I think we're working really hard to make sure that we keep and encourage and grow that diversity in our company, because I completely agree that, it's statistically proven that diverse companies perform better. So.
Absolutely. So what's next for you? I mean, maybe not so much what's next, but over the next while as you start to expand this business and grow it, where do you see yourself in 10 years from now?
I think it's so hard to see 2 years out right now.
Yeah,
that
sure.
10 years seems vastly different. I love building companies. I love this stuff. I'm having so much fun. I just want to keep, building and growing, and I'm going to have so much fun going through the scale stage that I'm just really looking forward to the challenges that brings, because they're going to be completely new to me. So I hope in 10 years I'm still addressing completely new challenges.
I was talking about this before, the idea of having a hand up, a hand across, and a hand down, right? The culture, the community is really good for the hand across. How do you see your hand up? Who is helping you, and who are you helping?
Yeah, and I think, that goes back to that mentorship relationships. I have a lot of mentors. Even as we push forward to bring diversity, there's a lot of people in more structured power roles who want to see that as well, who are reaching down and trying to help, women and minorities step into these roles that we've traditionally been banned from. I mean, if you think 50 years ago, I couldn't have been doing this. 25 years ago, it would have been a struggle.
Yeah.
It's tough to think of myself as diversity. I'm 51% of the population. How is that diversity? But if you take a historical perspective, So I think there's a lot of people who want to see that, and a lot of people pushing for that, and we have to let them help us get there.
I love it. Okay, so let's dig in on that. To your point, 51% are women, and that makes sense, except it's not necessarily showing up in the world, in leadership and things like that. And yet, when I look around and look at women-led corporations, women-led countries, why is this so important that we have more diversity at that level?
Yeah, and I think diversity is right. I think it's not right to say we need more women-led companies. We need a proper balance of both, because there's different perspectives. I mean, and I think part of why we're struggling on that right now is because, even as trying to develop my skills as a leader, 90% of the resources out there are men telling me how to be a leader.
Right.
And that's great. I appreciate that, but it leaves a gap that I don't yet know how to fill. And you can see people stepping and trying to fill that gap, and it's coming over time, but it takes more of us stepping into that role to generate that knowledge so that we can pass it along.
What are the strengths? I mean, I think there are a few, but I don't want to speak out of turn. Like, there's obvious strengths, but in your view of it, like you said, if it's a man that is telling you that you should lead, sure, that might work. It might not even work for another man. It might work for that man,
Agreed.
and not for another man, right? But even particularly when it comes to women, what are the strengths that are so important when you look at it from a leadership perspective for you?
If I think there's one thing that women bring to the table that we could teach, like that female entrepreneurs bring to the table that we could teach a lot of male entrepreneurs, it's humility and coachability. One of the most common things I hear is that a lot of other entrepreneurs don't want to listen. And one of the best ways that I've advanced my career is by really carefully listening to what everybody says to me. You don't have to do what they tell you to do, but if you're not gonna, you better think about why not. Because those people who've had experience and who've done it before, like one of my personal goals is to never reinvent the wheel. And
I love that.
And it's possible just by learning and listening. So.
Well, I've always found you extremely coachable.
Thank you.
We've had lots of conversations over the years, and I've always found that quite to be fascinating and awesome, very encouraging. I look for that in everybody, right? Why spend my time talking to a brick wall, as it were, right?
Right.
Okay, so it's an interesting play on the ego for a second there, though, in the sense that, women, I think, absolutely are bringing this coachability and humility to the table, and yet there are some who would also look at it and go, "Well, I'm a woman. I need to prove myself, and therefore I'm going to be more hard-nosed. You can't tell me what to do," and so that's almost like a counter, but it's more of a response than it is necessarily reality. So how have you played with that?
And I think we've already kind of seen that a little bit. Because what did I say? We bring humility to the table. But what did I also say? I have trouble stepping into my own power.
Sure.
Like, it goes hand in hand. It's a difficult balance. And that's one thing that I think a lot of women can maybe learn from male entrepreneurs, is that we can be strong and powerful, even when we're young.
Okay. Yeah, and so that's that coming up to it and getting comfortable in your power, which is awesome. What about going too far? Saying that I'm a woman or I'm diverse. Let's just say that. It's not, diverse. I mean, it's kind of a funny, it loses its meaning to a degree. But when you're, I need to do it a different way because I'm diverse. But then you lose the elements that are the benefit of it all. So how, going too far the other way and saying, no, I got this. So it's almost taking the ego to the other side because you're different, because you're saying, no, I'm a woman, I'm going to do it this way. Where's that trouble, and how do you kind of balance that top end? Coming into it is one thing, but also going too far is another.
And I think it needs balancing, because you need a certain amount of that. I'm a big proponent of listening to everybody and taking everybody's advice, but in the end of the day, you got to make your own decision.
Right.
And then you got to be willing to stand up and defend that decision. But that doesn't mean you have to railroad people along the way.
Okay.
Now, as to how to encourage people to do that, that's a very good question.
Yeah, it's a little bit different for everybody.
And I think with all those things that require balance, it's also testing. A lot of us leaders in startups haven't done this before. Okay. There's only one way to figure it out, and that's try it and see what works and see what doesn't, and find that niche where your leadership style makes you happy, where it makes your employees happy, and where you're successful. And it's not going to be like anybody else's. It's going to be yours. And the only way to get there is to make a hypothesis, test it, pay attention to the data that comes back, and refine your hypothesis. So
I think the other thing that generally women founders, women leaders bring to the table is a much better understanding of empathy. That ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, whether it's the people you lead, whether it's your customers, whether it's your vendors, whether it's your suppliers, whatever it is. And that's something I've learned immensely from my wife. I'm still working on it, but how have you seen that in your role? I mean, you're dealing with your dad, and you're dealing with, older people around you, older males and engineers. I'm sure you're not deeply skilled in engineering. How do you handle that empathy?
I actually feel like that's one of those ones that exists along the spectrum too. I sometimes feel like it's almost problematic. Like sometimes I don't want to be as empathetic to people as I am. I would like to be a little more immune from their emotional content.
Okay.
So for me, I think that's almost a problem in the other direction. I'm too likely to feel way too emotionally connected to people. And sometimes when the tough stuff has to be done, it's really tough because of that.
Right. So, not to rat on anybody in the company, so maybe just in general, because I think that that's a real interesting line, because it's, there's this emotional connection, this a way to be empathetic, and at the same time, a lot of the challenge comes from this other side's ego, right? And it kind of blasts you in your face, and it's like, well, okay, now I've got to lead. So is there a way that you can talk about that, dealing with that? Because that's the biggest issue, I think, in being empathetic. You can be empathetic, but you can't just roll over.
Right, yeah, exactly. You gotta draw a line in the sand and defend it. And I think to a certain degree it's been helpful that I work with my father. I actually work with my brother as well.
Oh,
he's
nice.
part of our team as well.
Great.
And I'm the youngest in the family, and I'm the leader of the team.
Yeah.
But these are people that I've been in conflict with my entire life. Like, we got fighting down years ago, so we can have those really productive disagreements. I'm not worried about hurting emotions of my leadership team because we know each other so deeply well.
That's great.
And that I think is really, really beneficial. It's going to be a risk as we go because we're likely to think alike. And I'm really cognizant of that fact, that we've all, come from a similar background because we're a family. So it's important to me as we grow that we start bringing in alternative perspectives. But when I bring them in, I want to maintain that kind of functional disagreement environment where somebody can say like, no, you are completely wrong. But at the end of the meeting, we go, okay, well, we've agreed that this is the path we're going to take.
Love that. So I could probably spend a whole session talking about this, but family at work. And so do you find like, I've often described it when I talk to people that have family that they're working with, is the difference in hats. In one hat you're a daughter and a sister, in another hat you're the leader of this company. Do you find that it's a kind of almost a more mental shift in that? Because when you leave work, you're now a slightly different role. How do you handle those two roles?
It really does feel like hats.
Yeah.
Like we're either talking work or we're not. And like we can switch very quickly, but that dynamic of who's in charge switches just as quickly as well. So I think it just has to be handled in a very fluid sense.
Was it talked about?
No.
It just happened that way?
It just developed organically that way. But I think, it helps coming from a family business. So my father and I have been working together for 15 years. My brother's been in and out of that over time. So it's always been kind of a dynamic where business and family were intermingled together and they were all part of the same kind of equation. It's a different dynamic now that I'm in charge and obviously the youngest being in the lead of the family. But how wonderful will it be to secure not my future, but my whole family's future when we succeed at this. So.
Well, I'm just going to drop it right there and leave it. So that's awesome. Thank you. So Anthea, how do folks find you? How do folks reach out to you? How would you like them to relate to you?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn. Add me on there. If you go to 2swater.com and you go to like the form where you reach in, that goes to my email. Okay. So that's the trick, is just send a form to the website and I personally will reply to you. Nice. And I would love to help out. I mean, like what you said about reaching up and reaching down. Tons of people have helped me get to where I am. I'm not done the journey, but there's lots I can do to help people who are on the same path as me. And if there's any way that I can help someone, I'm there, I want to do it. So please, I want the audience to reach out.
Perfect. Well, we'll try to make sure they do that. Well, thanks, Anthea. It's really great having you today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.